Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me for Opera 101 here with Cleveland Opera Theater. Very excited to be here. We're here in Cleveland. It's nice and bright and sunny out. Maybe not quite so warm, but it's June 1st, so it feels like we're really into summer now. I do have some exciting announcements to make today. So we are officially moving our 2020-21 season online. So we'll have all sorts of exciting programming that'll be coming out, including an operathon. So stay tuned for more information about our digital season. We are also going to change our format of Opera 101 a little bit. So as the Director of Education and Outreach, I'm really excited for this because I think we can have a little bit more of a deeper dive. What we're going to start doing starting today is pick a different composer each month and focus all of our Opera 101 sessions on that composer and their contributions to the art form. So for today, we're going to start with Giuseppe Verdi, who is one of arguably the best opera composer, but definitely in the top 5 no matter who you ask. And actually, statistically, he is one of the most often performed, and in 2019 was the most often performed opera composer. So great start here. So if you have a specific composer you'd like to see us focus on at some point, definitely let us know, because we have not chosen July, August, etc. as composers. So let us know if there's somebody specific you would like to see. For today, we're just going to do a little touch on who exactly was Giuseppe Verdi, and then we'll dive in deeper starting tomorrow. So Giuseppe Verdi. First thing that I always love about him is we're not 100% sure if he was born on October 9th or October 10th. There was some disagreement about how birth dates were recorded at that point, but he was born in 1813 in a small village. This was, back in the time when the First French Empire was still in effect. And so actually, the village was near Busseto, which is now Italy, but at the time it was in France. And so his given name was actually French, Joseph Fortunin Francois. So that's another thing I just always think is funny, that he's one of the most prominent Italian composers, but technically speaking, he was born in France. So you probably know him. You've probably heard his music, whether or not you realize you have. He was an Italian romantic composer, primarily known for opera. He's considered, with Wagner, to be the preeminent opera composer of the 19th century. And you've probably heard operas like Rigoletto or Aida, La Traviata. These are some of his best-known works. So the thing that's really cool, though, is he was actually self-taught primarily. Unlike a lot of the composers of the era, his family was not super musical. So he would take out books from the school library, teach himself the different rules of composition and different music. And he was only 8 years old when he got his first gig being paid to play, and it was playing organ. So 8 years old, he's already starting to bring in some cash with this musical talent of his. By the time he was 12, he started studying music, composition, but also Latin, the humanities, rhetoric. He was a real Renaissance man of the era, really becoming very well-rounded. When he was 19, he decided he was going to apply to the Milan Conservatory. But unfortunately, he actually got rejected because he was too young. But he decided to move to Milan anyway. So he moved to Milan. He started taking private composition studies with Vincenzo Lavigna, who at the time was a very famous composer from Milan. During this time, he also started attending different performances in the city. This was pretty much anything that was being performed, but he tended to go to a lot of opera as well as a lot of German music. So you can actually hear some of those influences in his compositions now. By 1833, he actually was hired as a conductor at the Philharmonic Society in Busseto. And so in addition to his own private compositions and still working on his own compositional style, he made a living by being an organist and conductor. So for the next few years, he's kind of refining his style. He's putting out some works, doing some local things. It's by 1840 that we see Verdi's very first opera. So his first opera, when he was 27 years old, was Oberto. It opened at Teatro alla Scala in 1840, and it was very well acclaimed. Not really performed now, but very well acclaimed at that time, so it was a good launch point for him to continue his operatic writing. Unfortunately, the second one, maybe not so great. It kind of crashed and burned, got really panned by the critics. That was Un giorno di regno. But he didn't let that stop him. He did continue to compose, and he followed that flop up with a couple of his biggest hits, Nabucco e Lombardi. So by 1843, he had really established himself as an operatic composer, and he continuously composed different popular operas over the next 50 years. So from 1813 to 1901, Verdi's lifetime, he was surrounded by some of the most incredible musicians of the classical world. We saw the rise of some big names. You know, this is when Rossini and Bellini and Donizetti are all on the scene, all making these amazing compositions. Verdi did try to distance himself a bit from bel canto. If you tuned in last week, you saw Stephanie talking about bel canto singing and exactly what that meant, the world of beautiful singing. Well, Verdi, not that he didn't want beautiful singing, but he really wanted to distance himself from that because he really wanted the role of the story and the character to be the forefront. He didn't really want people to focus as much on the technique of the vocalizing as much as bringing the character to life. So in this way, he really started paving the way for Puccini and other Verismo composers to really start bringing more reality to the stage. In fact, it was 1853 when he wrote La Traviata, and La Traviata in many ways could be considered the earliest of the Verismo movement. He's portraying a heroine who's not just a humble heroine, but also, you know, had some questionable morality there. You know, we've got a courtesan on stage. This is something that was offensive to many audiences. And yet, despite that, La Traviata was very well received and has stayed in the repertoire, being the #1 most often performed opera in 2019. So it's just, even now, 150, 170 years later, super relatable. And as I'll get into a lot more depth next week, if you know a certain very famous movie with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, was featured very prominently. So now we have one of this opera that's really paving the way for a new art form. So he's still pretty solidly in the Romantic era. He's definitely a very romantic composer in his style, his harmonies, his chord progressions. But he's definitely starting the trend moving forward. I would say that if you don't know Verdi, you really need to just go on YouTube and start looking up some of these operas that we're mentioning today, because I think the rest of this month, when we're talking about Verdi every day, is going to be a lot more fun if you have some context to the references we're making. And if you do know Verdi and you already love Verdi's music, I encourage you to look at some of the different takes that have been done and the different versions of his operas that have been produced over the past, you know, even 10 years. There have been some really interesting productions. So all of that said, very #1 composer of the last year in terms of number of productions. According to Opera Base, 673 of the productions that were put on in 2019 were Verdi's operas, and 138 of those productions were La Traviata. And the other Verdi opera that's in the top 10 for 2019 was Rigoletto. So don't worry, you'll hear lots more about both of those this month. In total, he actually wrote 25 operas before his death in 1901. So lots of material out there, and there's probably a solid 10 that are very often performed still. So this month, if you missed the beginning, we are talking about Giuseppe Verdi every day on Opera 101. We'll be tackling some aspect of Verdi and his works, and it's going to be a nice deep dive into this very important man in the operatic repertoire. So tune in on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 12:15 for Opera 101, And Wednesdays, we have Page to Stage, which is a series of interviews with executive artistic director Scott Skiba and multiple guest artists who join him to talk about the process of mounting an opera. And on Fridays, we have Domenico Boyajan and Maestro's Corner at 12:15, where we hear from some very interesting folks in the conducting world, singing world, and every other aspect of the operatic business. So every day, 12:15, we're here on Facebook Live. Tune on in, and then keep an eye on our website and on your email for other important updates about our 2020-2021 virtual season. Thanks so much for joining me today for Opera 101. I'll see you next time.